Have you ever wondered why, despite not deliberately seeking it, people tend to distance themselves from you? Why, even when you try to get closer, you feel that invisible barrier that seems to separate you from everyone else? If these questions resonate within you, you're likely experiencing the reality of being a Sigma male. Welcome to this deep analysis of why Sigma men hate socializing, where we'll explore the raw, cold truth behind this phenomenon. At Official Sigma Male, we dedicate ourselves to deciphering the complexities of this unique personality, offering not just analysis, but practical strategies to navigate a world that rarely understands the depth of those who follow this path. If you're looking for content that goes beyond the superficial, that dares to say what others keep quiet, and provides you with real tools for your personal development, I invite you to subscribe right now. The Sigma community is growing, and your place is waiting for you. Strategic solitude. Solitude isn't simply a consequence of being a Sigma man, it's a strategic choice, a deliberately employed tool. Unlike the isolation many experience due to external circumstances, the Sigma cultivates his solitude like a private garden where his true potential flourishes. Why does the Sigma man choose solitude? Primarily because he recognizes the incalculable value of time and mental energy. Each social interaction represents an investment of vital resources that could be directed toward personal growth or significant projects. The Sigma has made this calculation hundreds of times, always reaching the same conclusion. Most social interactions offer a negative return on investment. Take the example of Charles, a software developer who systematically rejected invitations to his company's social events. His colleagues interpreted his absence as arrogance or contempt. What they didn't understand was that Charles was using those hours to perfect a system that would eventually revolutionize the company. His solitude wasn't a product of disdain, but of a vision that required absolute concentration. The Sigma's solitude also functions as a natural filter. By establishing this initial barrier, only those truly interested in knowing the individual, not simply his social mask, will make the effort to cross it. It's a form of pre-selection that saves enormous amounts of time on superficial relationships. However, there is a price to pay. The human brain is programmed for social connection, even the Sigma man's. The difference lies in the fact that the Sigma consciously accepts this cost as part of his path. He understands that the depth of his thoughts and the clarity of his purpose require spaces of silence that constant social interaction doesn't allow. This strategic solitude manifests in concrete behaviors: the preference for isolated tables. In restaurants, the conscious choice of times when there are fewer people to carry out daily activities, or even the willingness to pay more for spaces that guarantee privacy. These aren't antisocial behaviors, but calculated decisions to optimize the environment according to the Sigma's specific needs. It's important to distinguish strategic solitude from shyness or social anxiety. The Sigma doesn't avoid interactions out of fear or inability, but because he has evaluated their value and decided to be selective. He can perfectly stand out in a social environment when he considers it necessary, but voluntarily returns to his solitude when the situation stops providing value. The inevitable consequence is that many people interpret this preference as personal rejection. They fail to understand that the Sigma's distancing rarely has to do with them as individuals, but rather with a meticulously managed attention economy. This misunderstanding generates a defensive reaction. Before being rejected, they prefer to distance themselves first. I'll create the content for the remaining 6 chapters of your Why Sigma Men Hate Socializing project. Deliberate rejection of social norms. The Sigma man maintains a singular relationship with social norms. He understands them perfectly but consciously chooses which ones to follow based on his own code of values. This normative autonomy represents one of the most powerful reasons why people tend to distance themselves from the Sigma. Society functions through a tacit contract. We all sacrifice a certain degree of individuality in exchange for belonging to the group. We follow social rituals, from standardized greetings to participation in collective celebrations, not necessarily because we find them meaningful, but because they facilitate social cohesion. The Sigma man, however, examines each norm under the light of his own internal logic. Consider Alexander, an executive who systematically refused to participate in corporate toasts and office birthday celebrations. For his colleagues, this attitude was incomprehensible and even offensive. What they didn't see was that Alexander dedicated additional hours to improving critical company processes and maintained deep relationships with mentors in his field. His rejection wasn't of people, but of rituals he considered empty of real meaning. The Sigma operates with a constant filtering system. Does this norm genuinely contribute to collective well-being, or is it simply an arbitrary convention? When he determines that a norm lacks rational or moral foundation, he simply discards it, regardless of the immediate social consequences. This attitude inevitably generates friction. Conformity isn't simply a social preference, it's an evolutionary survival mechanism. When someone like the Sigma demonstrates that it's possible to exist and thrive outside the established consensus, he implicitly questions everyone else's choices. This cognitive dissonance provokes defensive responses ranging from subtle criticism to active ostracism. The Sigma's normative independence manifests in multiple domains. He may reject dress conventions he considers superficial, abstain from participating in courtesy conversations he perceives as inauthentic, or decline invitations to social events whose only purpose is keeping up appearances. Each of these decisions, although perfectly rational from his perspective, gradually erodes his social capital in conventional environments. Paradoxically, this same characteristic that drives many away strongly attracts those who also question established norms but lack the courage to openly defy them. The Sigma, without seeking it, becomes a catalyst that legitimizes the silent dissent of others. The fundamental tension lies in the fact that the Sigma man doesn't reject social norms out of adolescent rebellion or ignorance, but after critical analysis. This subtle distinction is rarely appreciated by those who feel challenged by his behavior. For them, it's easier to label the Sigma as antisocial or problematic than to question the foundation of their own conformities. Emotional independence. As a barrier, the emotional independence of the Sigma man simultaneously constitutes his greatest strength and the most significant barrier to his interpersonal relationships. Unlike the majority, who operate within a network of mutual emotional dependencies, the Sigma has developed an internal system of validation and stability that drastically reduces his need for external approval. This emotional self-sufficiency doesn't appear overnight. It's the result of formative experiences, often painful ones, where the Sigma learned that emotionally depending on others represents a strategic vulnerability. Over time, he develops what we might call an autonomous, emotional operating system that processes and regulates his internal states without requiring constant social feedback. Take Martin, a brilliant professional who maintained the same equanimity both when his project was acclaimed and when it was harshly criticized. His colleagues interpreted this consistency as coldness or arrogance. What they didn't perceive was that Martin had developed internal criteria for evaluating his work, immune to the fluctuations of others' opinions. His stability didn't come from insensitivity, but from an independent source of validation, The most evident manifestation of this emotional independence is the Sigma's limited need to share his emotional experiences. While most instinctively seek external validation or comfort in the face of significant events, the Sigma internally processes his joys and difficulties. This tendency creates an asymmetry in his relationships. Others share vulnerabilities that are rarely reciprocated. The problem arises because shared vulnerability is the primary mechanism through which humans build intimacy. By limiting this exchange, the Sigma inadvertently obstructs the natural path toward deep connections. People perceive correctly or incorrectly that they're revealing more of themselves than they receive in return, creating an imbalance that eventually becomes unsustainable. Emotional independence also manifests in the Sigma's ability to make difficult decisions without the consensus or approval of his social circle. He can end relationships, change careers, or relocate geographically, based exclusively on his internal analysis, bewildering those who expect a more collaborative decision-making process. It's important to emphasize that this independence doesn't equate to coldness or absence of emotions. The Sigma experiences the complete emotional spectrum, often with great intensity. The difference lies in that he has developed internal mechanisms to process these emotions without constantly needing the social scaffolding that most use. For those who have established their identity and security in emotional interdependence, the Sigma's self-sufficiency proves profoundly destabilizing. It represents an alternative paradigm that implicitly questions the need for the structures of emotional dependence that sustain most relationships. Self-centered mindset and its consequences. The Sigma man naturally develops a self-centered mindset that, far from being selfish in the conventional sense, reflects an extraordinary concentration on his personal path. This internal orientation creates a distinct psychological gravity that inevitably alters the dynamics of his social interactions. Unlike the narcissist who constantly seeks external admiration, the Sigma maintains an internal dialogue so rich and constant that external conversations often pale in comparison. His mind is perpetually occupied evaluating ideas, refining concepts, or visualizing possible futures. This state of productive self-absorption is frequently interpreted as disinterest toward others. Consider Richard, an investment strategist who rarely participated in the social conversations at his office. His colleagues considered him distant and arrogant. What they couldn't see was the intense mental process that Richard constantly maintained, analyzing market patterns and developing predictive models even during moments of apparent leisure. His silence wasn't disconnection, but concentration on a different level of processing. The Sigma's self-centered mindset manifests in concrete behaviors that generate social friction. He may abruptly interrupt conversations he considers irrelevant, show visible impatience with discussions he perceives as circular, or simply disconnect mentally when his interest wanes, something his interlocutors invariably perceive and find disconcerting. The fundamental problem lies in the asymmetry of expectations. Most people assume that during a social interaction, both parties will maintain a similar level of attentional investment. The Sigma, however, assigns mental resources based exclusively on the perceived value of the interaction, without considering the social conventions that dictate equal participation regardless of content. This strictly meritocratic economy of attention frequently results in a relational inconsistency that others find bewildering. The Sigma can appear extraordinarily present and engaged when a topic genuinely captures his interest, only to seem completely absent moments later when the conversation drifts toward topics he considers trivial. The inevitable consequence is that many people experience this selectivity as personal rejection. They don't understand that the Sigma isn't evaluating the person, but the content of the exchange. This perception of rejection generates defensive responses, preventive distancing, negative interpretations of his intentions, or even open hostility. Paradoxically, when the Sigma finds someone who truly captures his intellectual or emotional interest, he can demonstrate a level of concentration and relational commitment that far exceeds the norm. This intensity, however, proves as disconcerting as his apparent indifference, creating an all-or-nothing dynamic that few find sustainable in the long term. Direct communication, when truth drives people away. The communicative style of the Sigma man is characterized by a frankness that, although based on principles of honesty and efficiency, frequently acts as a potent social repellent. In a world where interactions are governed by subtle layers of diplomacy and strategic courtesy, the Sigma's direct communication stands out as a destabilizing anomaly. The Sigma has come to value literal truth over social truth, a crucial distinction that most don't consciously process. While conventional communication constantly balances factual precision with the preservation of social bonds, the Sigma systematically prioritizes the efficient and accurate transmission of information, even when this clarity compromises interpersonal harmony. Consider David, a consultant who openly pointed out the conceptual deficiencies in a colleague's presentation during an important meeting. While he considered himself to be offering valuable feedback, the rest of the team perceived his intervention as an unnecessary aggression. What David didn't calibrate was the social context. His colleague needed public validation more than technical criticism at that specific moment. The Sigma's communication operates with strict verbal economy, minimal words for maximum clarity. This efficiency, however, eliminates the social buffers that soften the impact of uncomfortable truths. When the Sigma states that an idea won't work, he's not initiating a social negotiation where he expects to be convinced otherwise. He's communicating a final conclusion based on his internal analysis. This communicative literality clashes head-on with dominant social expectations. In most contexts, people don't primarily seek informative precision, but confirmation of their belonging to the group, validation of their self-concept, or simply the pleasure of emotional connection through verbal exchange. The Sigma, by not satisfying these underlying needs, generates a relational dissonance that proves deeply uncomfortable. The Sigma's frankness is regularly misinterpreted as deliberate rudeness or lack of empathy. In reality, many Sigmas possess a deep understanding of others' emotional dynamics, but have made a conscious calculation. They consider offering useful truths, although momentarily painful, to represent a greater act of respect than providing false validations. This direct communication particularly affects interactions in three critical areas: professional feedback, where the Sigma identifies weaknesses that others prefer to diplomatically ignore; group dynamics, where he openly questions consensuses based more on social harmony than on evidence; and personal relationships, where his resistance to double-speak eliminates the comforting ambiguity that many prefer to maintain. The irony lies in that the Sigma deeply values communicative authenticity and offers his frankness as a gift, not as an attack. However, in a social environment where communication primarily serves to strengthen bonds rather than transmit precise information, this gift is frequently perceived as an aggression against the structures that sustain group cohesion. The high price of authenticity. The Sigma man's commitment to authenticity represents perhaps the most profound reason for his social isolation. In a world where adaptability and social chameleonism are rewarded, The Sigma's unwavering alignment with his internal values creates friction that inevitably distances him from conventional social circles. Authenticity for the Sigma isn't merely a philosophical preference, it's an existential necessity. Having experienced the psychological toll of pretense firsthand, he has concluded that the energy required to maintain socially convenient facades exceeds any potential benefits. This cost-benefit analysis leads him to a radical position. He would rather be authentically rejected than falsely accepted. Consider the case of James, a marketing professional who refused to endorse campaigns for products he considered ethically questionable, despite the career advancement such cooperation would bring. His colleagues viewed this stance as arrogant idealism. What they missed was that James wasn't making a moral performance, but preserving his psychological integrity. For him, compromising his values would exact a heavier toll than any professional setback. The Sigma's authenticity manifests in ways that create social discomfort. He refuses to participate in workplace politics that would advance his career, declines to engage in the polite fictions that lubricate many social interactions, and withdraws from relationships that demand performative behaviors inconsistent with his core self. Each of these choices, while personally liberating, systematically erodes his social integration. The fundamental tension lies in what psychologists call the authenticity acceptance paradox. Most social structures are designed to reward conformity rather than authentic self-expression. When the Sigma prioritizes internal congruence over external approval, he inevitably positions himself outside these reward systems. The consequence is a form of social marginalization that, while voluntary in principle, carries real emotional and practical costs. This commitment to authenticity creates particularly acute challenges in hierarchical environments where success often depends on strategic self-presentation. The Sigma finds himself repeatedly facing impossible choices: advance by compromising his integrity or maintain his authenticity at the cost of opportunity. His consistent choice of the latter option gradually accumulates into a pattern of professional limitation that others misinterpret as lack of ambition or capability. Paradoxically, the Sigma's authenticity simultaneously repels the majority and powerfully attracts a minority who recognize in him something they themselves aspire to but haven't fully embodied. These rare connections, characterized by mutual recognition at the level of core values rather than social performance, provide the Sigma with evidence that his choice, while costly, offers unique rewards unavailable to those who prioritize acceptance over integrity. The ultimate irony is that the Sigma man doesn't cultivate authenticity to stand out or make a statement. He simply finds the alternative, navigating life through a series of strategic personas, psychologically unsustainable. What appears to others as a principled stance or even arrogance is, from his perspective, simply the path of least resistance, the only way he knows to exist in the world without becoming fragmented. Finding balance in a Sigma life. The path of the Sigma man isn't one of total isolation, but of strategic selectivity. The most evolved Sigmas recognize that their natural tendencies, while valuable in many contexts, require conscious management to prevent unnecessary suffering and missed opportunities for meaningful connection. Finding balance begins with self-awareness, specifically distinguishing between authentic Sigma traits and reactive patterns developed as protective mechanisms. Many behaviors that Sigmas attribute to their intrinsic nature are actually adaptive responses to past relational wounds. The mature Sigma understands that healing these wounds doesn't compromise his identity, but enhances his freedom to engage authentically when he chooses to. Consider Michael, a brilliant researcher who initially avoided all professional collaborations, viewing them as distractions from his independent work. After intentional self-reflection, he recognized that this absolutist position stemmed not from productivity concerns, but from earlier experiences of having his contributions undervalued. By healing this trigger, he developed the capacity for selective collaboration that dramatically expanded his impact while preserving his essential autonomy. The balanced Sigma learns to create what we might call controlled connection points, structured social engagements where expectations are clear and the purpose aligns with his values. Unlike avoidance, which is reactive, this selective engagement is proactive, a strategic choice to participate in specific social contexts that offer genuine value while minimizing those that don't. This balance manifests in practical approaches. The Sigma might establish clear time boundaries for social engagements, cultivate relationships with the small percentage of people who understand and respect his communication style, or develop explicit social scripts that allow him to maintain authenticity while navigating conventional interactions more smoothly. The most challenging aspect of this balance involves reconciling the Sigma's natural directness with the social sensitivity necessary for functional relationships. The evolved Sigma doesn't abandon his commitment to truth, but learns to deliver it. With strategic timing and contextual awareness, he recognizes that effectiveness, actually being heard, sometimes requires moderating not the message itself, but the method of delivery. Central to this balanced approach is the recognition that social skills aren't inherently manipulative, but can be authentic tools for translating the Sigma's internal reality into forms others can receive. Just as learning a foreign language doesn't change what you want to say, but expands who can understand you, developing social fluency doesn't compromise the Sigma's authenticity, but extends its reach. Perhaps most importantly, the balanced Sigma cultivates selective vulnerability, the capacity to intentionally share portions of his internal experience with carefully chosen individuals. This targeted openness creates islands of genuine connection that satisfy his legitimate human need for understanding while preserving the boundaries that protect his essential independence. The ultimate wisdom of the balanced Sigma life lies in recognizing that independence and connection aren't opposing forces, but complementary energies. The mature Sigma doesn't choose between self-sufficiency and relationship, but cultivates both, maintaining his center while extending bridges where they serve his deeper purpose. In this integration lies the fullest expression of the Sigma potential, not a man isolated from humanity, but one who engages with it entirely on his own terms. Understanding why Sigma men hate socializing isn't just about recognizing patterns. It's about embracing a different way of existing in a world designed for constant connection. The Sigma path isn't about rejecting humanity. It's about engaging with it on more deliberate, meaningful terms. If the insights in this video resonated with you, remember that you're not alone in your experience of feeling alone. The official Sigma Male channel is building a community of like-minded individuals who understand the power of strategic solitude and authentic living. Subscribe now to join us on this journey of self-discovery and genuine connection. Because true strength isn't found in conforming to social expectations, but in having the courage to define your own path. In a world that constantly demands your attention, your time, and your energy, the greatest act of rebellion is choosing precisely where these precious resources go. Subscribe for weekly insights that will help you master this art and transform your life.